Stavros celebrated his 97th birthday this past March. He resides on a hillside overlooking the village of Evdilos on the island of Ikaria in the eastern Aegean. Every morning he treks to his garden, a 20-minute walk down a slope through terraced land his grandfather once cleared. Twice a week he makes the journey to the market. In the evenings he strolls to his neighbor Kostas's house for a cup of mountain tea and 2 hours of conversation. A ritual, Kostas's wife claims, has continued without interruption for over 40 years. Stavros has never stepped into a gym. He has never consumed a vitamin. He does not even own a scale. When a researcher from Harvard questioned him during a longevity study conducted on the island in the mid-2000s about what he had eaten for breakfast that morning, Stavros paused for a moment. He genuinely had to think, because breakfast was not something he considered worth remembering. Finally, he said, "A bowl of lentils with olive oil, a piece of sourdough bread, and some wild greens I picked from behind my stone fence." That specific answer is the core of this video. The Ikaria study, a research project managed through the Harvard School of Public Health in collaboration with researchers at the University of Athens, followed hundreds of residents on this island and returned with findings that do not fit the usual narrative people tell about longevity. It was not a supplement. It was not an optimized fasting protocol designed in a Silicon Valley laboratory. It was not a precisely engineered macronutrient ratio. It was a pattern, a repetition so consistent across decades that it had become invisible to the people living it. Stavros did not realize he was following a longevity diet. He was simply eating what his mother cooked, what his garden produced, and what cost almost nothing at the weekly market. He has never even heard the phrase Mediterranean diet. The first time a researcher used it in his presence, he asked what the word Mediterranean meant in the context of eating. He assumed it was strictly a geography term. Here is what that pattern actually looks like. Not the summary version, not the headline where someone says Mediterranean diet and lists olive oil and fish before calling it a conclusion. We are looking at the actual food, the actual amounts, and the mechanism underneath each one that explains why it works differently than most of what you have been told. The part that gets omitted from most Mediterranean diet coverage is this. The people who live the longest in these communities do not follow a Mediterranean diet. They do not know it exists. They just eat. And for them, eating is not a health intervention. It is just Tuesday. The extraordinary thing about Stavros is that Tuesday for him has looked essentially the same for 60 years. That consistency, not any single food, not any single study, but 60 years of the same unremarkable Tuesday is the mechanism nobody sells. The first thing in Stavros's kitchen every morning is olive oil. Not a teaspoon, not a tablespoon drizzled for flavor. He uses it the way most Americans use butter, generously, without measuring, as a structural element of every meal. He pours it over the lentils before they cool. He dips his bread in a small pool of it. He adds a full ladle to the chickpea soup after it is done cooking. After, not during, because he knows that heat degrades something in the oil, though he could not tell you exactly what. He learned this from watching his mother cook. His bottle is empty by the end of the week. The Predomed trial, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013, conducted across multiple Spanish clinical sites with over 7,000 participants at high cardiovascular risk, assigned participants either to a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil at a minimum of 4 tablespoons daily, a Mediterranean diet supplemented with mixed nuts, or a low-fat control diet. The study was stopped early, not because something went wrong, but because the benefits in the olive oil group were so clear that continuing to withhold them from the control group was deemed ethically unjustifiable. Major cardiovascular events, stroke, heart attack, cardiovascular death, dropped by approximately 30% in the olive oil group compared to the low-fat diet. That result made headlines. The mechanism behind it did not. There is a compound in fresh extra virgin olive oil called oleocanthal. That name sounds like something from a pharmaceutical patent, but it is not. Oleocanthal is a polyphenol, a plant compound that produces the characteristic peppery throat sensation you feel when you swallow a high-quality fresh olive oil. That slight catch, the one that makes some people cough when they try an unusually good oil for the first time, is oleocanthal. It works in the body through the same anti-inflammatory pathway as ibuprofen. Same molecular target, same mechanism. But at low doses, continuously delivered through food across decades, when Stavros pours olive oil over his lentils, he is not just adding fat. He is adding a daily, persistent, low-level anti-inflammatory input that has been running in his body for 9 decades. This matters for anyone over 55 because most age-related chronic diseases share one underlying feature: chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation. Not the acute inflammation that makes a wound red and swollen. That kind resolves. The chronic kind is invisible. It runs at a low hum for years, slowly stiffening arterial walls, degrading cartilage, disrupting glucose metabolism, interfering with insulin sensitivity, and accelerating cellular aging at the mitochondrial level. Oleocanthal does not eliminate it in a week. Nothing does. But consumed daily at the amounts the Ikarian centenarians use, the suppressive effect accumulates. The compound keeps hitting the same target, gently, every meal, every day. The false culprit embedded in most mainstream dietary advice for people over 60 is this: cut fat. Use oil sparingly to reduce caloric intake. That advice is not wrong about the arithmetic. A tablespoon of olive oil contains roughly 120 calories. 6 tablespoons, which is close to what Stavros uses, is 720 calories from oil alone. The framing is entirely logical if you believe that calories are the primary variable and that reducing calories is the primary goal. But that framing completely misses what olive oil does in the body when consumed at quantity. It optimizes for the wrong metric. It treats olive oil as a calorie source to be minimized, and in doing so eliminates the oleocanthal, the oleic acid signaling, the fat-soluble vitamin absorption effects, and the polyphenol diversity that make the Ikarian pattern work. Stavros is not lean and cognitively intact at 97 because he restricts olive oil. He is those things in part because he never stopped eating it. Tier 1 protocol. For the next 2 weeks, change one thing only. Treat olive oil as a primary ingredient, not a condiment. A full tablespoon cooked into your morning eggs, not drizzled on top afterward. Pour it over roasted vegetables before and after cooking. Use it as the liquid base of soups rather than a finishing drizzle. Dip bread in it instead of spreading butter. Don't measure. Stavros never measured. If you can find an extra virgin olive oil with a harvest date on the label, not a best buy date, an actual harvest date within the last 12 months, buy that one. The polyphenol concentration in olive oil degrades significantly with time, heat exposure, and light exposure. A fresh oil in a dark glass bottle is a fundamentally different ingredient than a plastic jug that has been sitting near your stove for 18 months. Check your olive oil right now. Is there a harvest date? Is the bottle glass or clear plastic? Has it been stored near heat? Those 3 observations tell you more about whether your oil is actually delivering oleocanthal than any brand name or marketing claim will. There is a second compound in olive oil that does not get mentioned in the same sentence as oleocanthal, but that the Ikarian data keeps pointing toward: oleic acid. Oleic acid is a monounsaturated fatty acid, the primary fatty acid in olive oil, and it does something at the cellular membrane level that saturated fats and polyunsaturated vegetable oils do not. It integrates into cell membranes and influences how receptors on those membranes signal. In particular, oleic acid appears to affect signaling through AMPK, an enzyme sometimes called the cell's energy sensor, which regulates metabolic processes associated with aging at the cellular level. This is not a claim that olive oil is a drug. It is an observation that a compound you consume in every meal is doing something at the cell membrane level persistently that other commonly consumed fats are not doing. Stavros has never heard of AMPK. He knows that his father used olive oil and lived to 91, and his father's brother used olive oil and lived to 88. And the one cousin who moved to Athens in the 1960s and started eating margarine, Stavros brings this up with genuine concern, has been on blood pressure medication since he was 62. This is not a controlled trial, but Stavros has run his own observational study for 9 decades, and his conclusions about olive oil are firm. You can stay here as long as you need to. One ingredient used more generously. That is a complete first step. Everything else in this system can wait. Tier 2 is the food that almost no one in America eats, and that Stavros eats 4 or 5 times a week. Horta. The word is a broad Greek term for wild or foraged leafy greens. Cooked. In Ikaria, this commonly includes dandelion, purslane, amaranth, chicory, and a variety of regional plants that grow on the hillsides above the villages. In American grocery stores, the practical equivalent is whatever dark leafy green is least expensive that week: kale, Swiss chard, mustard greens, or collard greens. The Ikarian method is always the same. Cook them briefly in boiling water, drain them, then dress heavily with olive oil and fresh lemon juice. Not raw, but cooked. The cooking matters more than most people realize. Raw dark leafy greens contain oxalic acid, which binds to calcium, iron, and magnesium, and significantly reduces their bioavailability. A brief boil deactivates a substantial portion of the oxalates. The olive oil added after cooking increases the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins and carotenoids: beta-carotene, lutein, zeaxanthin, vitamin K, by factors of 3 to 10 compared to eating the same vegetables without fat. The lemon juice provides vitamin C, which converts plant-based iron from the non-heme form to a more absorbable form. This combination did not emerge from nutritional science. It emerged from centuries of Greek women cooking the same way until the people eating it were healthy. The science eventually caught up and confirmed what the cooking had already worked out. One specific note about purslane, which grows as an aggressive weed in most American gardens and backyards, and is almost never eaten in the United States. Purslane has been measured to contain more omega-3 fatty acids than any other land plant that has been tested. Gram for gram, it carries omega-3s at levels that rival flaxseed in certain lipid profiles. It also contains significant melatonin, which most plants don't. Stavros probably eats it twice a week without knowing any of this. To him, it is a weed that happens to be edible, and that his grandmother put in the bowl along with everything else. A practical note on how Stavros's neighbor Maria, who is 84 and has been eating horta her entire life, described the cooking method to a visiting researcher. She boils the greens in salted water for about 6 minutes until they are tender but not dissolved. She drains them thoroughly and presses out the excess water. Then, and this is the part she was specific about, she does not add the olive oil while the greens are still steaming hot. She waits until they are warm, not hot, because her grandmother told her that hot greens take too much oil and the oil turns. Whether her grandmother had the chemistry right or not, the result is that the olive oil coats the greens in a way that preserves its flavor profile and probably its polyphenol content. She finishes with the juice of 1 full lemon. She eats this as a side dish at the main midday meal about 3 times a week. She takes no supplements. Her blood work, reported in the Ikaria study follow-up at age 79, was notable enough that the research team flagged it as an outlier. The researchers' note was, dietary pattern consistent with Ikarian baseline. No medications. Horta consumption 4 to 5 times per week since childhood. That's the data. That is what 4 to 5 times a week for 70+ years looks like in a blood panel. Permission to add tier 2 at your own pace. 1 week with olive oil is a complete beginning. The greens follow when they follow. Tier 3 is the practice that receives the least attention in Mediterranean diet writing, and that may explain more of the Ikarian longevity data than any single food. Legumes daily. Not twice a week, but daily. Lentils, chickpeas, black-eyed peas, fava beans, white beans, rotating through the week, eaten as the primary protein source at the main meal. In the analysis of the Ikaria study population, legume consumption appeared as one of the strongest independent predictors of longevity in the centenarian group. The mechanism involves butyrate. When gut bacteria ferment the dietary fiber in legumes, specifically the resistant starch and oligosaccharides that human digestive enzymes cannot process, they produce short-chain fatty acids, the primary one being butyrate. Butyrate is the main fuel source for colonocytes, the cells that form the lining of the colon. A well-nourished colon lining is a functioning barrier between gut contents and the bloodstream. When that lining degrades through inadequate fiber, chronic low-grade intestinal inflammation, or poor microbial diversity, the barrier breaks down, and what the research calls intestinal permeability increases. Systemic inflammation follows. The legume butyrate colon lining connection is not hypothetical. It is well documented. It is also almost entirely absent from mainstream dietary advice for people over 60. Beyond the colon, butyrate appears to influence gene expression in ways associated with cellular aging, specifically affecting activity within the FOXO3 transcription factor pathway. FOXO3 has shown up across multiple independent longevity genetic studies in populations as different as Ashkenazi Jewish centenarians, Okinawan centenarians, and Californian centenarians as one of the genetic variants most consistently associated with living past 100. The dietary pathway to activating favorable FOXO3 expression appears to involve, among other things, the butyrate produced by fermented dietary fiber. The legumes in Stavros's lentil bowl may be doing something at the gene expression level that no supplement has yet replicated. That is speculative at the mechanistic level, but the epidemiological correlation is not. Wait, before we go further into the integrated system, I want to tell you something specific. Not another study, but what Stavros actually ate last Tuesday. He woke before 6. He made mountain tea in a small blackened pot on his stovetop, a loose handful of dried herbs gathered from the hillside above his house, sage, wild oregano, wild thyme, and a small amount of dried rosemary. He let it steep for about 4 minutes, then poured it directly into a ceramic cup without straining. The mountain tea deserves a moment here. It is not an afterthought. A 2013 study examined the specific herb combinations used in Ikarian mountain tea and found that the combination of sage and wild oregano produced measurable blood pressure effects in the study population, effects that were not present in either herb consumed alone, only in the combination. Sage contains rosmarinic acid and carnosic acid, both of which have documented antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties in cell culture research. Wild oregano contains carvacrol and thymol, compounds with antimicrobial properties, and more recently, some evidence of anti-tumor activity in preliminary studies. Wild thyme contains thymol as well. Rosemary contains carnosol, which has been studied for effects on inflammation pathways. The Ikarian centenarians drink this tea daily, usually twice, once in the morning before breakfast and once in the afternoon. They do not add sugar. They do not add milk. They do not drink it cold. Stavros has been drinking it since he was a child. His version is whatever is growing on the hillside in quantity that season, dried and stored in a cloth bag on a shelf near the window. It is not a wellness product. It costs nothing beyond the time to gather and dry the herbs. The polyphenol diversity delivered by that simple daily cup across 60 years may be doing something that is impossible to replicate with a single compound supplement. The combination of rosmarinic acid, carnosic acid, thymol, and carvacrol together, steeped together in hot water twice a day for 60 years, is a polyphenol exposure profile that no pill has reproduced. Whether that matters at the level of individual outcomes is uncertain. At the population level, the Ikarian centenarians drink it, and they are here at 97. He sat in the doorway of his house, the one that faces east, for approximately 20 minutes before doing anything else. He did not read anything. He did not look at his phone. He owns a phone, but it is for emergencies and usually stays in a drawer. He sat and watched the light change. He drank the tea. When the cup was empty, he got up. For breakfast, he had the leftover lentils from the night before, reheated in a small pan with a spoon of olive oil and the juice of half a lemon. A piece of bread that his neighbor Maria bakes on Tuesday mornings and leaves at his door wrapped in cloth. 12 olives, the kind cured in brine, firm and slightly bitter, not the large pitted ones in jars. He ate standing at his kitchen counter, looking out the window at the terraced hillside. He did not eat quickly. He did not eat in front of a screen. Lunch was the main meal: chickpea soup with fennel, 2 carrots, wild greens, a handful of dandelion that Costas brought from his garden, and a full ladleful of olive oil added to the bowl after serving, not to the pot. More bread. He ate this with Costas at the outdoor table under the fig tree. They talked for over an hour after the meal, still at the table. The conversation was about Costas's grandson, who had moved to Athens, and about a new road the municipality was planning to build through the valley. Neither of them was in a hurry to be anywhere else. Dinner was small and early: a piece of aged feta with 3 sliced tomatoes from his garden, olive oil over everything, several olives, a piece of bread, and one glass of the local red wine that his other neighbor Jorgos makes each autumn and distributes to the people on the hillside. He was in bed before 9 hours. No application tracked any of this. Nothing was weighed, no macros were counted. The glycemic load of the day was low, not because Stavros planned it, but because there was no industrial food in the pantry. The eating window was naturally compressed, not because he follows intermittent fasting, but because the culture around him doesn't eat between meals, and dinner has always been light and early. The polyphenol diversity was high, not because he takes a polyphenol supplement, but because the herbs in his tea were varied, the olive oil was this season's, and the vegetables came from the ground behind his fence that morning. When the researchers analyzing the Ikaria data tried to find the active ingredient, the single dietary component most responsible for the longevity signal, they ran into something they did not expect. There was no clean single variable. Every time they isolated one food and controlled for everything else, the effect size shrank. The olive oil was significant in isolation, but less significant than the olive oil plus greens combination. The legumes were significant, but most significant in the people who also consumed the most diverse plant foods overall. The herb teas were significant, but primarily in the subgroup that also fasted orthodox seasonally. The mechanism, they concluded, was not a compound. It was a pattern, specifically low glycemic foods consumed across a very long time window. High polyphenol diversity from many different plant sources rotating through the same daily rhythm. Periodic reduction in animal protein that allowed cellular maintenance to run, and meals eaten slowly in a social context that reduced cortisol and supported parasympathetic digestion. None of these four elements was sufficient alone. All four together, maintained for decades, produced the Ikarian mortality curve, which shows centenarians on this island dying at a rate that lags behind the Greek national average by roughly 8 to 10 years. The strongest predictor of longevity in the Ikarian centenarian population was not any single food. It was the absence of disruption. The same Tuesday for 6 decades. There is one more layer to the Ikarian pattern that almost never appears in coverage of the Mediterranean diet, and it may be the most structurally important of all: the Greek Orthodox fasting calendar. Stavros has followed it his entire life. The Orthodox tradition prescribes approximately 180 days of dietary restriction per year. Lent in spring, the Nativity fast before Christmas, the Apostles' fast in summer, the Dormition fast in August, plus the fasting Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year. During these periods, no meat, no dairy, and no olive oil are consumed. Only plant foods, legumes, bread, and limited seafood on specific permitted days. Stavros does not think of this as a health practice. He thinks of it as religion. He would find it strange if you described what he does during Lent as intermittent fasting. He would say he is preparing for Pascha. The metabolic effect is structurally similar to what researchers now describe as periodic protein restriction, combined with time-restricted plant-based eating. During extended periods of reduced animal protein intake, the body activates a cellular process called autophagy, the cell's internal recycling mechanism. Autophagy identifies damaged proteins, dysfunctional organelles, and cellular debris, breaks them down, and repurposes the components. It is the biological equivalent of the cell cleaning its own house. It is suppressed by consistent high-protein feeding and upregulated by periods of lower caloric and protein intake. The 2016 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Yoshinori Osumi specifically for his research into this mechanism, the same one that Stavros' grandmother activated without knowing what it was called every Lent for her entire adult life. Stavros has been cycling autophagy for 9 decades, not by design but liturgically. The practical protocol for incorporating this without adopting a religious calendar you don't hold is less demanding than it sounds. 2 or 3 days per week shift toward plant-predominant meals. Legumes as the primary protein, vegetables dressed generously in olive oil, and no meat or dairy on those days. This is not elimination. It is a compositional shift. The caloric density of the Ikarian fasting pattern remains high because legumes and olive oil together are calorie-dense. What changes is the absence of animal protein and the effect of that absence on cellular maintenance cycles. One more thing before the integrated system: And I want to be careful here because this is the part I am least certain about, and I would rather say that clearly than overstate it. The connection between the butyrate pathway, the FOXO3 gene, and the specific food Stavros eats is not a clean line. The epidemiological data from Ikaria is strong. The butyrate colon lining research is strong. The FOXO3 longevity genetics research is strong. The three-way connection between legume consumption, butyrate production, and FOXO3 expression in humans over time is not yet established with the precision I would want before presenting it as settled. It is a plausible mechanism, a compelling one, and preliminary research points in that direction. But I want to say clearly, the reason to eat legumes daily is not because we have confirmed the FOXO3 pathway in a clinical trial of octogenarians eating Ikarian lentils. The reason is that the Ikaria study shows this population eating legumes daily and living to 97 at rates that are not matched elsewhere. The mechanism is our best current explanation for why. It may turn out to be more complicated, but that complexity doesn't change what Stavros eats on Tuesday. The integrated system, eating the way Stavros eats, looks like this. Morning begins with herb tea, whatever combination of sage, oregano, thyme, and rosemary you can find. Loose or dried, steeped for a few minutes. Breakfast is simple. Leftover legumes from the previous night, reheated with olive oil and lemon, and bread if available. The main meal is midday, a legume-based dish, soup, stew, or room temperature salad, finished with olive oil added after cooking, eaten slowly with someone when possible. Dinner is small and early, cheese, vegetables, olives, and a small glass of wine if desired. 2 or 3 days per week, shift fully toward plants with no animal protein or dairy. That is the whole structure. Not a diet, but a daily rhythm that became invisible through 60 years of Tuesday. Now look at what you ate yesterday, not to judge it or calculate anything. Just make a list of every distinct plant food that appeared. How many? 3? 7? 14? The Ikarian centenarian pattern is not built around any single superfood. It is built around polyphenol diversity accumulated across decades of rotating many different plants through the same daily rhythm. The number of distinct plant foods that pass through your kitchen in a week is more predictive of your long-term health than the presence or absence of any individual ingredient. Here is the one thing you can do this week. Add a full tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil to one meal you already eat, not replacing anything. In addition, pour it over whatever is already in the bowl. Let it pool. That is the first movement of the entire system. The lentils arrive next, whenever that happens naturally. The greens follow. 2 plant-heavy days arrive eventually without announcement. The pattern builds itself through repetition until it no longer needs to be remembered. That is what 97 years of Tuesday looks like from the inside. Here is a timeline. Not week 1, week 4, week 12. That framing doesn't fit what the Ikarian data actually shows. It shows a different kind of arc. The first month, nothing dramatic will happen. You will eat more olive oil. You will add greens once or twice. Lentils will appear in your kitchen. You will notice toward the end of the month that you are eating more plants than you were before, without having designed that to happen. That is the right direction. The first time someone asks why you are cooking greens in olive oil, explain it simply. Say it is how people on a Greek island eat. Say it is not complicated. The simplicity of your explanation will be accurate. Somewhere in the first year, not on a specific day, you will realize that you are not tracking anything, that the legumes have become a weekly default rather than a decision, and that the olive oil is always there. That is the Ikarian threshold, the point where the pattern stops being something you are doing and starts being something you just do. Stavros reached that threshold around 1960. He was 31. He has not had to think about it since. There is no Greek word for longevity diet. There is a word for Tuesday, and Tuesday for Stavros looks the same as it did when he was 41. Not because he was disciplined, but because it never occurred to him that Tuesday needed improving. If this story of Stavros and the hidden rhythms of Ikaria has changed how you look at the food in your kitchen, please subscribe and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the history and the simple, powerful habits that the modern world has tried to bury. Let's cultivate a healthier future together. The next treasury of ancient wisdom will be opened very soon.